Welcome to the D-Shift podcast, where we provide inspiration, motivation, and education to help you transition from the challenges of divorce to discover the freedom and ability to live life on your own terms. Are you ready? Let's get this shift started. Hello, and welcome to this episode of the D-Shift podcast. And I am so excited to be inviting back a great friend, a person I personally, if I had financial concerns, I would go to hands down. And that is Leah Hadley. And she is going to talk to us all about some of the money patterns and challenges of dealing with finances, especially when, as sometimes independent women, we try to do things maybe without consulting the professionals we really need to talk to. So I want to tell you a little bit about Leah first. She is a nationally recognized financial planner and mediator who has spent more than a decade supporting individuals through this whole complexity and the challenges of divorce, particularly around finances. She's the founder of Intentional Divorce Solutions and Intentional Wealth Partners. She is also a podcast host of Intentional Divorce Insights. And on this, her podcast is fantastic. She talks about the human side of divorce, money, reinvention. And like me, she kind of has an eclectic group of people on the podcast. I've been a guest. I loved our episode, and I'm just so happy to welcome Leah back again today. So, Leah, with all of that, hello.
Thank you so much for that kind welcome. That was just, oh my gosh, you made my day, Marty.
Well, you always make my day because you are so practical in the information you provide. And I know we have a similar background as teachers and as people who got into this divorce field, not as our goal, maybe as little kids to do this, but through circumstances. So, Leah, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you are so passionate about helping people deal with all areas of divorce, but in particular, you focus on the financial support. Yeah.
So my background was not in a traditional path as far as financial services went. I started actually as a teacher. I taught third grade for Baltimore City Public Schools. I taught adult education for the community college in Baltimore. And I got really burnt out in the classroom. And it was just a temporary job. I was swimming in student loan debt at the time. It was at an investment bank as an administrative assistant. And I was very fortunate. It was in the equity research department, which there's a whole story about my background there that I won't get into today. But what I remember from those first days, and I had a master's degree at this time, I felt like an educated individual. I was into my career already. Everybody around me was speaking a foreign language, Marty. I had no idea what anybody was talking about because there is a whole language that goes around wealth creation, right? Building and protecting wealth that I just wasn't familiar with. And so that is one of the reasons why I am so passionate about educating people around finances in particular, because most of us are raised in such a way where we don't talk about finances. We don't learn about finances. And then, had, a couple other positions along the way, but ultimately ended up going through my own divorce. And at that point, I was already a financial advisor. I had probably, if I think back, actually over 10 years of financial experience at that point when I went through my divorce. And I was so overwhelmed with the financial decisions that I had to make. I had 3 young children at the time. Income was changing. And this was back when we had bought our house in 2007, right before the market crashed. And so now everybody's arguing nowadays about this great equity that everybody has in their house. Well, back then we were underwater as far as our mortgage went. And so it wasn't who gets the house, it was who's stuck with the house, right? And so all of that kind of financial pressure and the stress and making those decisions, even with all my knowledge and experience, was really hard. And so that's why I'm so passionate about this. I feel like a lot of people are learning about their finances for the very first time when they're going through the divorce process. So there's this whole language around that. Then divorce itself has a whole vocabulary around it, right? And you're going through this huge life transition where suddenly you're supposed to be taking in all this information and making these decisions that are going to impact the rest of your life. These aren't decisions that are happening in a vacuum that impact the next month, 2 months, 3 months. These are financial decisions that are going to have an impact on your retirement, on the legacy that you leave in the future. And so these are really important, meaningful decisions. And so that's why I'm so passionate about it, because I can see the difference between people who make those informed, good decisions and those who do it from just a place of fear and emotion and stress, and they just don't set themselves up for future financial success.
Yeah, and thank you so much for saying that, because Leah, that's one of the things I work with my clients on is, and I lose clients over this. They'll come to me, they'll want to work with me, and I'll say, okay, but the first thing we're going to do before we get into any of the divorce stuff, I want to know where you want to see yourself 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years. And I lose people right there because they're like, nope, I just want to get through the divorce and then I'll deal with that. And here's that is so ass backwards part of my language.
No, really.
It is, because what happens is you make decisions that look good today with no understanding of where you want to be tomorrow. How can you possibly make choices that are right, congruent, that whether you want to use the woo-woo terms aligning with your values, or whether you just want to say you want to have the cash to do what you want to do? If you don't have those future plans in place and you don't know the long-term tax implications, and a dollar is not a dollar. I know that's something that you go over with your clients a lot, because I've been to your workshops and it's really been helpful for me to understand that. What are some of the other things that you see are kind of maybe patterns? And I know we wanted to focus a little bit on patterns on our call today. What is this? What is this idea of money patterns, and why do we have to become more aware of them during the divorce and in moving forward in the future?
Yeah, so, a lot of times people don't really think about their experience with money. A lot of times people, when it comes to whether it's financial decision making or day-to-day spending, it's just sort of default operation, right? We don't really kind of bring awareness to how we go about making these decisions. And sometimes we're just not even consciously making the decisions, right? We're just on default. But the fact of the matter is, all of the experiences, and especially the experiences you have when you're growing up, have a huge impact on how we think about money, how we interact with money, how we make decisions around money, right? And so for some people, money is a topic that does not get discussed when you're growing up, right? It is just a taboo topic. We do not talk about money in this family. Yeah. And that's something that it's sort of, in the dark, if you will. Well, what happens when you have to make all these financial decisions through the divorce process? If you know that you are somebody who's really uncomfortable having conversations about money, suddenly you're talking to your attorney about money, you're talking, negotiating between it, whatever that looks like for you, that alone, just being able to verbalize and talk about this thing that needs to be discussed, can be a real block for people to even be able to negotiate and have these, to get to some kind of a resolution, right? And we need to be aware of those things, right? Yeah. You may also have had experience in your lifetime where maybe you didn't have enough resources. Maybe it was hard to put food on the table at some point in your life, or you were concerned about shelter, basic needs, right? Anybody who has had an experience in their lifetime where they've had trouble meeting their basic needs, when you're going through the divorce, a lot of times that's going to trigger some real fear around just financial safety, right? Making sure that we have the basics covered. And this doesn't matter what your income is. And I want to be very clear about that. Doesn't matter how much assets you have, doesn't matter what your income is. This impacts people at all levels of wealth, right? But it really does have a significant impact in terms of what you can ask for and what you will ask for in the divorce process, but also just being willing, again, to have these negotiations and to come from a place of looking for solutions, right? I'm a big believer that when we're negotiating the divorce process, it's not about competition. It's about how are we going to resolve the issues that need to be resolved so everybody can move on in the best financial footing moving forward. Well, what happens is when we're stuck in these places, we can't talk about money, or we are worried about financial safety, then it's hard to move forward. It's hard to move the case forward because you're stuck in this place of, I'm not going to have enough. There's no solution that's going to fill that void for you, right? And people are not aware of these patterns, right? They're not aware of what's going on in their mind and the experiences that may be impacting their ability to come up with great resolutions for their divorce settlement.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I call it the scarcity mindset, not just me. Lots of people use that term. I certainly didn't
Yeah.
invent it. But when you're coming from that space of there's never going to be enough, it's hard to sign on the dotted line. And it's
Yeah.
hard to recognize a really good deal when it's looking you in the face.
That's
If
right.
your partner says, I want the house, I'm going to buy you out. Here's going to be your equity, here's going to be your allocation from the equity, and I'm going to give you like 75% of the 401k. You might look at the numbers and go, well, that doesn't equal to the value of the house. But that 75% in that 401k in 20 or 30 or 10 years, that is going to be huge compared to what the housing market might do. And you just can't see that because the numbers don't look right. That's what I see a lot.
Well, and I think a lot of people don't know how to interpret the numbers. And like I said before, even as a financial professional, when I was trying to figure out how do I negotiate my settlement, I was so overwhelmed. My thinking was so clouded with all of the changes that were happening in my life that I really needed somebody to look at it objectively for me and be like, there are actually solutions here that are going to work. We just need to take the emotion out of it.
Right. Yes, yes. And I was, this brought me, I was just having an interview with a money coach. And one of the things that we were talking about was how that money can be a really dirty word for some people. And like you just said, in it can even be hard to acknowledge to your family that you did okay during the divorce, like because maybe everybody talks about how they got screwed over by the family court system and how their partner beat them down in mediation, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that you don't want to be the only one going, oh yeah, I did really good in my divorce and I got a great lump sum settlement. I told this story. I had a client who actually bought herself a ring that she had always wanted. He had proposed with a really cheap little ring, and she wanted a beautiful ring, and she went out and bought it. It was like $6,000. She was so embarrassed that she had that kind of disposable income. She wouldn't wear it in any pictures or anywhere her family
Oh.
might see it. And again, it's that mindset, right? That pattern in our thinking.
Well, and I'll tell you what, Marty, I've looked at plenty of settlement offers over the years where I'm like, this is a really good deal. And I think even people hearing that might be surprised to hear that.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, everybody isn't out to get you, right?
Yeah.
There are a lot of people actually who want to take responsibility for their partner, even though they're going through a divorce, especially if they've cared for their partner financially over the years, and they don't want to see them flounder, right? They want to see them have a successful transition. And no, for those who are listening, that may not be your situation, but I think people are actually surprised at how often that is the case, but are so blindsided by the messaging that we have out there in the media about how divorce is all about getting the other person or whatever. But in reality, there are some really good settlement offers that I see, and the person on the receiving end of that offer can't even see how good a settlement it is
Right.
because they're blocked, right?
Right. Right. And you're right, because sometimes it is just, I've worked with lots of people who are the moneyed spouse who say, look, I don't care what it is. I don't care if I come out bad in this divorce or it's an unfair divorce settlement for me. I know I've got the capacity of making,
Right.
150, 250, $350,000 a year. I can make this up. Just give them what they want. Let's get this done. And it's interesting. Sometimes even when you give them what they want more then. And so that
Right.
can be the reverse side of this problem. Leah, what are some of the we talked about this challenge of seeing, seeing a good settlement. What are some of the myths or misunderstandings you hear a lot of clients come in to you with? And you, like me, you work with both men and women, so I know that it can be either gender or both genders that have these issues about what's going on.
There's so many. I mean, really, Marty, there are so many. And I think a lot of it is just people going onto social media and speaking from their own experience, like literally advising people from their own experience, but perpetuating myths in the process, right? There are a lot of people who will enter the process and just say, well, let's just have a judge decide. That's going to be the most fair thing. Let's just have a judge decide. Well, the reality is, the vast majority of cases will never be in front of a judge to make that decision. Let's start there. But even if that is the case, boy, I've seen some awful settlements come out of the courts. Just because you are getting to this last person who maybe is going to make those decisions doesn't mean it's going to be a good outcome for anybody.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And a lot of times it is sort of what is the path of least resistance in terms of that settlement. And again, that may not be the best option for your family, right? So that is a big one that comes up. So often, Marty, though, I hear from people, I mean, honestly, almost every day where it's like, boy, I wish I knew you 10 years ago. There
Exactly.
are
Yeah.
so many people who don't realize the kinds of supports that are out there available for people who are going through a divorce. And like I said before, for a lot of people, the financial decisions that they're making through this process will impact them for the long term. And if you're making some of the biggest financial decisions of your life, it might make sense to consult with a financial professional, right? But so many people think that, okay, if I involve another person in this process, whether it's a CDFA or it's a divorce coach or it's going to mediation, I'm already paying my attorney. I'm afraid to invest in other professionals because I think it's just going to cost me more, right? But in reality, when you're making financial decisions, a lot of the costs are actually costs that you may not be aware of. Administrative costs associated with dividing up assets, tax inefficiencies, right? Things like actually tax benefits that may be available to you that you didn't even realize and weren't part of your settlement thinking, right? I mean, there's so many times when people are really losing money in very real terms, sometimes tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands
Yeah.
of dollars,
Yeah.
because they don't have good financial advice when making these financial decisions. And it's not your attorney's job to give you tax advice. That's
Right.
not their role, right? But really involving financial professionals, involving a divorce coach who's going to help you with that communication, help you processing those emotions, those things actually shortcut the process. They
Yeah.
don't make it a longer process. They don't make it cost more. In a lot of cases, they can actually save you a tremendous amount of money. That is a big one that people are surprised about.
Yeah, and I want to support that wholeheartedly. So as a divorce coach, I do not touch the finances with my clients. Like I'll run them through a basic budget, how do you fill this out? How do you need to, what do you need to know about this? And I don't ever tell them what to do. I just ask them the questions. But if they start asking a lot of money questions, if there is real estate, if there are retirement funds, if there are assets or collectibles or things of value that are out there in the divorce, I always recommend my clients see a CDFA. And you're right, maybe you're going to spend, hire them for an hour or a couple of hours or invest in their program or their package, but you are typically going to make all that money up. Because number one, you're not going to be wasting all your time talking to your attorney about financial stuff that the attorney is going to guess at or tell you he or she doesn't know. And also, I think hiring your own person rather than just using the person your attorney or your attorney's firm says, we always use this person. Not to say that person might not be a bad person, but taking control of the situation and researching the professional you want to work with, I think it's another empowerment step in the divorce journey. And I find a lot of women would prefer to work with women when it comes to talking about money. And that's not trying to be anything against men who do this work. It's just, especially if financial betrayal and concerns are an issue in the relationship, speaking with another woman can be a real, a comfort.
Yeah, and you may be surprised, Marty, but a lot of men feel more comfortable talking to women about their finances as well. And so I think having that relationship, that it feels a little bit different, right? When I talk to somebody about money, I don't start with what's in your bank account. When I talk to somebody about money, I talk about what's important to you, what matters to you, what are you worried about, what are your priorities? Then we'll look at the numbers. But let me get to know you as a human being first, right? Now, I recognize all financial professionals don't do that. And certainly anybody who your attorney is hiring is just going to be looking at the numbers, right? Like
Right.
that's what they're hired to do. But when I'm working with somebody one-on-one, I want to know them as a person, because if I'm advising you on financial decisions that are going to impact the next decade or 2 decades or whatever, I want to make sure I'm doing it from a place of really understanding what's important to you.
Right. And what I love about CDFAs, that's a certified divorce financial analyst, which Leah is, among other things, is that you don't actually tell people what to do. You give them the scenarios, you play it out so they understand the tax benefits or whatever, what the income investment benefits. And then you really just help them understand what the numbers are, and you guide them towards what might be a good option, but you never tell anybody what they need to do. They ultimately have control over their decisions. Is that right, Leah?
Yeah, I even do that in my financial planning practice, Marty. That is, I always tell people it's your plan, it's not my plan, right? And so we want to really make sure that we understand what is most important to you. And then even when you tell me this, like absolutely this is the most important thing to me, as we continue to work together, I might find out there is actually a reason why that's important to you, and that thing is not actually what's so important to you. And I'll use an example of a house because this comes up all the time, right? It may not be the house itself that is as important as maybe being in that school district, or, being in the community where your friends are and your network is and all of that, right? So really understanding people, where they're coming from and their why behind what they want, allows us to look at the numbers differently, right?
Right.
Because there are so many options. That's the other thing. Like, people kind of get in their head, like maybe there's one or two ways to settle a case. There are countless ways to settle a case, but there may not be countless ways that are in your best interest, right? And so really understanding that is so important. But then we can look at all different kinds of scenarios, and we do. We continue to model the scenarios as people are negotiating their settlements, so they can look at, all right, does this lump sum of alimony make sense for what I'm planning for my future? Or do I really need that ongoing cash flow? And, what are the pros and cons of each?
Right.
But really helping people understand those things so they're not making that decision in a vacuum.
Yeah, and I know we're almost out of time. We could probably talk for the rest of the day on stuff like this, but I just recently had a situation where a client took a lump sum settlement and then went to qualify for a mortgage, did not have a job, and because even though she had
Yeah.
X amount of money in the bank, she wasn't going to qualify for the mortgage because she had no steady income. She would have been far better ahead to take that spousal support for 5 years and be able to show 5 years of income coming in.
Right.
And then she's kind of like, now I have to use the whole lump sum to put it all down on the house, and so she's back to house rich and cash poor again in one fell swoop. So
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, these things are so important. Leah,
Absolutely.
of all the things we have talked about, and I really hate to wrap this conversation up, of all the things that you've shared with us, and thank you for doing this, what do you think is the important thing you want people to remember today from your message?
So I think in general, my message is really about being intentional with your decision making through the divorce process. It is very common for people to get into the process and be very reactive. There are a lot of things that may come up through the process, but taking the time to really process your emotions, to educate yourself on the information you need to make informed decisions, and to get the guidance from the professionals that you need. So that way you aren't making these decisions in a vacuum. You really understand the implications, not just today, but for the long term. It just changes the entire process and puts you in the driver's seat, which feels so much better than just feeling like you're just getting through it, right? And reacting to every trigger that comes up. So the more you can kind of approach the process with intentionality, understanding that these are huge life changes and big decisions need to be made. If we can be more intentional, I just think we can improve the situation for families so much.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I do love that idea of intentionality. I always say, knowledge is power at the negotiation table. So if you understand where your bottom line is, then you can negotiate with confidence, because you're not going to ever drop below what you absolutely need to be successful.
Right.
So, Leah, you have kindly provided a gift for the listeners. Can you let us know a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, so I am providing our ebook on the intentional money method. It's our intentional money method starter kit. And the intentional money is method is all about bringing that intentionality to your financial decision making. And there are 6 pillars that make up the intentional money method. The ebook walks you through really understanding how each one works, why they're so important, and where you may find that you have some gaps and may need some support in kind of building yourself up in these particular areas. So it's a really, really valuable ebook. I highly encourage people to take advantage of that. It really can change the way you think about money.
Yeah, and I've looked at it before. I have a copy. I love it, and I do send my clients, go grab that book from Leah, because even if you think you're pretty comfortable with this, you can always learn a little bit more. It never hurts to brush up on things. Leah, if people are listening and going, "Oh my gosh, I want to find out more about her. I want to know how to work with Leah," what's the best way to do that?
So I am very active on LinkedIn. You can find me at Leah A. Hadley, and on Instagram as Watch Her Thrive.
Wonderful. Please connect with Leah. And I love her messages, and her Facebook posts really give you great information and little tips and insights. And Leah does a lot of webinars that are free to attend. So if you're with her on LinkedIn, you can catch those webinars and sign up and learn a little bit more and get some in-person training with Leah and her team. So thanks so much for being here today, Leah. And thank you all for listening to this episode of the D-Shift podcast. Thanks for listening and supporting the D-Shift podcast. If you would like to attend live trainings by our amazing guests and have a chance to ask questions and get answers from our experts, join the D-Shift crew. If you would like to attend live trainings by our amazing guests, head on over to www.divorcecoachforwomen.com from our experts and click on join the D-Shift crew. For more details and to sign up, head on over to www.divorcecoachforwomen and click on the podcast page.